I have a rule of book signings, which is I never talk about the book. But Michael Sherman is here from Little Brown, who is my brilliant editor. And so I feel compelled, because he's going to buy me dinner later. I want to have a good bottle of wine, so I need to say a few words about the book. First of all, Little Brown, I've published with them for a very long time. Michael's a fabulous editor. You know, there's some people who just love books. Michael's one of them. And he was a great partner in this project. And I'm more proud of this book than anything I've ever done. So it's just a great book. So this is a 3-minute sales pitch, and then move on to other stuff. It occurred to me a few years ago that we're all, for the most part, cooking in the 19th century, right? I mean, most of the cooking, the classic American repertoire was Northern European, Mastery of the French Cooking, Fanny Farmer, Mrs. Beaton's Book of Household Management, The Joy of Cooking, stocks, sauteing meat before you make a stew. I don't know why you need to do that. Essentially meat, potatoes, a lot of fuel in Northern Europe, a lot of meat. And so even in French cooking, you take fairly bland ingredients with a lot of technique and time, you turn it into something that's flavorful. So that's fine, except our ingredients aren't as good as they used to be. And secondly, most of the world doesn't cook that way. So if you go to Thailand, or if you go to Morocco or Mexico or Istanbul or Spain, it turns out people have very different ways of thinking about food. And so what many people do in the world is start with big flavors. If you go through Mastery of French Cooking, how many spices are you going to see? Very few. Northern Europe had maybe 9 or 10 spices. The Ottomans had 88. How many chilies would you see? None. How much ginger, lemongrass, and fish sauce and soy sauce? None. And when it comes to herbs, I always used to say on the TV show, a sprig of thyme. What is a sprig of thyme going to do for 3 pounds of meat in a stew? Nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. And 2 bay leaves. If you read Ottolenghi, for example, and he says, 2 cups of basil or cilantro or parsley or a cup of dill. I just did a recipe this morning on a show where there were 2 cups of cilantro, 2 cups of parsley, 1 cup of dill. It's an Iranian frittata cuckoo. Well, massive quantities of flavor. So if you start with chilies and lots of herbs and lots of spices and all sorts of other ingredients, the process of cooking isn't that hard. You don't need a lot of technique. You don't need a lot of time. If you go to Thailand, in Chiang Mai, where we were in December, it's all about the prep, right? And then the cooking takes about 5 minutes for most recipes. So that's the concept of the book and of Milk Street, is that you can get big, bold flavors relatively easily if you start with big, bold flavors. If you start with relatively bland ingredients, you have to use a lot of technique and time to get what you want. I went to La Grande Vie. I've been twice, once in 1981 and once about 6 months ago. And it's ridiculously expensive, but it's still there. So you might want to go before it closes, one of the great classic French restaurants. And I ordered the sea bass with a nage with small vegetables. And I'm just going like, this isn't going to be made at home. I mean, this is just too hard. The fish has to be perfectly fresh. The vegetables have to have flavor. It's just not going to happen. So the concept of Milk Street is, let's go around the world and let's cook with a bunch of people, home cooks, and figure out what we can learn from that and bring that back here. It's not authentic cooking at all. It's learning something we can take back here and then transform into home cooking here. So that's the book. And my cooking about 5 years ago completely changed. I cook a lot more now. The food's a lot better. And you just use a few more spices. There's sumac chicken from Palestine, for example. They use 3 tablespoons of sumac on that, not a quarter teaspoon. If you za'atar, by the way, if you don't have za'atar, it's a spice mix, which depends where it's from. It has different things in it: cumin, savory, some other things. A friend of mine's a chef in Boston, and she wants to do a T-shirt which says it's this za'atar stupid. Because you can put it on everything, and you're a genius. So there's some spice mixes you can use. It just completely changes your cooking. So that's Milk Street. Our TV show launched Saturday. The book just came out today. We actually have a cooking school in Boston. It's called Milk Street because we're on Milk Street. We're not very creative, so it's all we could think of. Magazine's been out for a year, and we're opening a few other things next month. So that's Milk Street. So I'd like to go around the country, and I do events from time to time, and I like people to send comments during the events. And here are just a few I like. I don't care what people say. I think you are sexy, and I love your bow tie. Thank you. I was watching a recent episode, and you all look constipated. Thank you. I love it when people take time to write. Sometimes my mother loves homemade bread but does not make it. The idea of yeast being a living organism freaks her out, and she's certain that she can feel the yeast crawling on her hands. She must live in Bates Motel, yes. Let's see. This is the young Donald Trump, I'm sure. I like your shows. This is from a young 9-year-old. I like your shows because your friends cook a lot of food. I like cooking too. I'm 9 years old and live in Seattle. I cook with my mom sometimes. I was wondering if you could please send me a 26 DVD set. Smart kid. Whoopie pies. Now to the marshmallow cream. Good Lord, working with that stuff is sort of like having to lube a tractor while trying to keep your party dress clean. Must be from Vermont. I love this. Lobsters are living creatures, and I don't want to put it in a pot of boiling water. Can you just cut off their heads first? Of course you can. Yes, why not? Substitutions. I always think writing cookbooks and recipes, it's sort of a war between the people who make the recipes at home and the people who write them, and vice versa. Because people don't follow recipes. Recipes are, I like to say, vague suggestions about how you might make something if you had all the ingredients at the time you read the recipe in the right cookware, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, as a recipe writer, I know that we do a lousy job of explaining what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But this is a sample. This is an actual letter of someone who wrote in and made a few substitutions. I've been trying unsuccessfully to convert your recipe for cream cheese pound cake to a healthier version. Why would you do that? I don't know. Anyway, I substituted the cake flour with a combination of almond flour, coconut flour, barley flour, golden flaxseed meal, eggs with egg substitute, milk with almond milk and coconut milk, unsalted butter with 3 sticks of Smart Balance omega-3 butter substitute, sugar with cane sugar, coconut sugar, and stevia, cream cheese with 1/3 less cream cheese or fat-free cream cheese. I added baking soda and baking powder with the salt for no particular reason. I've tried several different combinations with little success. The cake turns out either too dry, too moist, with a pudding-like consistency, or mealy. Would you please recommend a combination of the substance ingredients that I could try? No, I can't, actually. Just make the bloody recipe. I mean, what? I don't understand. We did a thing on Twitter recently. These are the worst substitutions you ever made in recipes. When my father-in-law was learning to cook, he replaced grapes with olives in a chicken recipe because he, quote-unquote, figured they looked similar. A lot of substitutions are like they're the same color, people. I accidentally swapped baking soda for cornstarch. Dish had vinegar in it, so the results were volcanic. This is good. Jackfruit for beef and sloppy joes. Let's see. My dad once put powdered iced tea mix in a meatloaf because we were out of breadcrumbs. Kids need lemon juice for after-school treat. Took handful of lemon Jolly Ranchers, tried to microwave into liquid, weeks to clear smell. I didn't have raisins, so I chopped up and then froze my young son's fruit snacks. Not my proudest moment. My dad sprayed Pam all over himself, thinking it was spray sunblock. Well, I guess he would roast nicely. This is good. When I was 5, I helped Mom make chocolate chip cookies, used the chocolate I found in the bathroom, X-Lax. Started my role as chef. Let's see, what else? I like this. A friend of mine's mother once mistook Fisherman's Friend throat lozenges for Fleischmann's yeast. How is that possible? I don't know. I once tried to make a chicken curry with a bucket of KFC chicken. I took the coating off. It didn't help. And one of my favorites, canned peas for frozen peas, except used to alleviate swelling of testicle after vasectomy. Canned peas were cheaper but not cold. Common instead of Kraft Parmesan cheese. I went under the kitchen sink when I was a little girl because I wanted some cheese on my spaghetti. Ouch. So here's my favorite letter of all time. It's actual letter. Several months ago, I came across a recipe for a roast pork loin in your magazine. I was thrilled to discover that I had all the ingredients, including the pork loin. Well, that's good. I mean, I love it when people say the name of the recipe, they have the ingredient. That's great. I pulled it out of the freezer before going to bed. Early next morning, I found it right where I left it, lying in the kitchen sink, defrosted, ready to go. The recipe said, trim, butterfly, and pound the pork loin to an even 1-inch thickness with mallet or bottom of heavy skillet. this is one of those things that just gets worse. Still in my nightgown, that's just a tip where we're headed. I trimmed, butterflied, and pounded. Pound as I might, I couldn't get the thing any thinner than 2.5 inches with a few thick lumps here and there. Determined to get it flatter, I decided to improvise. I put on my favorite hiking boots, wrapped the pork loin in a plastic bag, and placed it on the kitchen floor. Then I jumped up and down on it, slipping off once or twice, damn near breaking my ankle. Nothing, not even a half-inch thinner. She keeps going. Still wrapped in the plastic bag, I took the pork loin out to the garage and placed it under the rear tire of my pickup truck. This is from Wyoming. It's a ranch. I got behind the wheel, put the truck in reverse, and proceeded to back over. Well, as the tire made contact with the roast, I can only assume that some air had built up in the plastic bag, because the next thing I knew, it had exploded under the weight of the truck and sent the loin flying under our minivan, which was parked in the bay next to the truck. I couldn't reach it, but not to worry. She's amazingly persistent. I grabbed my favorite hiking stick with the one sporting a sharp metal point. I poked the roast and carefully eased it out from under the van. When I stood up, standing in the garage door was the UPS man looking very confused. How do you explain why you're standing in your garage wearing hiking boots and a nightgown holding a pork loin impaled on the end of a walking stick? So, yes, so this is my job, is to make sure people like that actually are able to cook. So that's what we do at Milk Street. We love what we do. We also have a cooking school 3 nights a week. We do some nonprofit teaching of Big Sisters of Little Boston and the Boys and Girls Club on the weekends, which we're very happy to do. And if you're ever in Boston, stop by 177 Milk Street. We'd love to have you. So any questions?
So so many times in your shows before, you'd mentioned that when they get spicy food.
I know where you're headed with this, yes.
So has your taste changed? Or have you conditioned
Or have I just gotten old? Yeah. No, my taste have changed because I still don't like recipes where it's overwhelmingly hot. I like balance, but I've found that in most places in the world, that's not what they do. I mean, here in America, if you go to a barbecue place, sometimes they relish the notion of being it's too hot to eat. That's sort of part of the gestalt. But other places in the world, there's heat, but it's not overwhelming heat. And also, they balance heat with sweet. If something's too hot, too many chilies, if you just add a little bit of sweetness to it, it actually balances out the heat. So I like heat, but for example, when I was in Thailand, I had the papaya salad. That was briskly hot. So I'm not sure I was quite up to that. But most things, I like heat in moderation. But most places in the world, everything's about balance. I mean, you have, for example, charred and bitter. Those are 2 things we don't have in this culture. Bitter is not the South a little bit, but bitter is not a Northern European taste. Well, that's true, but that's not in cooking. And so that's something that balances nicely. There's creamy and there's crunchy. There's sweet and there's spicy. There are lots of other things going on, and so I like it up to a point, but I don't like it to be nothing but that. So did I get out of that okay? Okay, pretty good.
I understand this may be a sensitive subject, but can you talk at all about how things are going with your former organization?
Are you a member of the legal profession, or are you?
No,
Or are you a reporter?
Neither.
Or do you work for my? I can't get into that. I just say that I just think we're at a point in this culture where it's really important that people want to become part of things they believe in or excited about, and I'm just really excited about this because this is how I cook, and so I think it was just time. There's a watershed moment in how we cook now, and this is how I cook now. So we have a very small staff. We have about 25 people at Milk Street, and they're all terrific. I have Jason Hirsch, who was the former food editor at the AP, is now working with me. My wife, who does the television radio shows, lots of other folks, and so we're just doing what we really like to do. And I think consumers understand that passion for if you really like to do something, and that's why I'm doing this, because I just love to do it. The radio show, by the way, it's a weekly public radio show, and it's an opportunity it took me 5 years to figure out you can't cook on the radio. I mean, I tried, believe me. It just doesn't work. But you can do lots of other things, like travel the world and talk to people around the world. And so this is, our passion. And so I think that's the future. I mean, I don't think people don't even invest their money now unless they believe in the investments, right? I mean, it's a very different world than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So that's why I'm doing this.
Can you just talk a little bit about spice storage? I love the new spices you're introducing, but I have a drawer full of all sorts of stuff. Do I throw it away? I mean, is it just
from the
useless?
Clinton administration?
Or
my mother
before?
actually had baking soda and baking powder from the Eisenhower administration, or before. There's a guy in New York I work with spices, Laboite, Circaz, and he says a year. I say 6 months. I would just buy very small amounts of spice. He sells little tiny, and we will shortly too, very small amounts of spice at a time. I find I go through spices a lot more. I mean, I never used to use spice, so I'd buy spice, and then like my mother, it would sit there for 10 years. It doesn't really matter how you store it as long as it's out of the sun and it's cool. But I would buy very small amounts. I know at Penzeys, I made the mistake of buying, it sounds good, like 4 ounces, doesn't sound like very much, and the bag's this big, and then 8 years later, you still have the bag. So just buy small amounts. I don't think, the other thing you should be careful of is sometimes there's spice mixes that have nuts in them, like dukkha, they actually go bad pretty quickly. But I would say 6 months to a year is fine. I mean, I had some spices from Morocco from 3 or 4 years ago I was there, and I swear they were still good. And my wife likes to clean everything up, so she threw them out. But I actually believe they were still good. So it's either spice merchants tell you that because they want turnover, but I would say a year is probably fine, and buy small amounts, yeah.
Are you going to have any more weekend cooking schools? I'm in New York. I can't get up there for an evening cooking school. I wanted to go for your first one and couldn't make it. Are you going to have any more?
Yeah, we do have, the question was, do we have weekend cooking schools? Yes, we do. We have day and a half cooking schools every couple of months. And so, yeah, we do. You can come up for that.
What are some good everyday uses for pomegranate molasses? Like, how would you incorporate it into sort of the average American diet?
Well, 10 years ago, John Willoughby worked with me for many years. He was then at the executive editor of Gourmet, and then when Gourmet closed, he came back to work for me. And he always used to tell me about that, and I'd laugh at him as another silly thing. And now I have like 3 bottles of it in my kitchen, which goes to show. It's if people haven't used it, it's sweet and sort of sour, and I use it all the time to finish a stew, for example, or finish a braise. If you put a little bit of it in, it has that sweet sour hit, and nobody knows exactly what it is, but it just gives it a lot of depth. It's also great in a vinaigrette, I find, especially if you're dressing vegetables or something like that. So I think it's great. There are a lot of those: fish sauce, soy sauce, oyster sauce, pomegranate molasses, etc. It turns out the world's full of a lot of different levels of quality, and so one of the things we're trying to do now is source some of that stuff to get the really good stuff. There's like 5 different kinds of soy sauce, they're different grades. Fish sauce, the best fish sauce is like it's extra virgin. It's the first, almost like the first pressing is the first stuff that comes out of the bottom of the barrel. And so if you go to a place like Thailand, there'll be 4 or 5 different levels of quality. Some used just at the end, some used in cooking, depending on the quality. But pomegranate molasses is a definite must. I use it probably twice a week, 3 times a week.
Hi, I had a follow-up question on the topic of spices. You had mentioned za'atar earlier, which I'd never heard of prior to 2 or 3 years ago. And I was wondering if you had discovered new blends of spices that you weren't familiar with, or new uses for spices that you could share with us that maybe are out of the ordinary or that you really enjoy using.
Well, sure.
now.
There's a whole bunch. And also some books. There's the Palestinian Table's just coming out this fall, and she makes a spice blend of 9 different spices for her recipes. And also za'atar, there is no formula for za'atar. Every blend is different, really. So I find the spices I use most are, and the other thing you should think about is whole seed versus ground. We just did a Cape Malay curry from South Africa where they use whole spices, not ground. And it's a very different flavor. You can taste each of the spices individually. It's not muddy. And so if you keep them whole, you keep that independent flavors. But obviously cumin is the spice. And have you ever thought about salt and pepper? I mean, why does salt and pepper go together? You know, they should just get a divorce, right? I mean, because, pepper, salt's salt, and pepper's just a spice. I mean, in the Middle East, it's salt and cumin. They put salt and cumin on everything. Cumin is the pepper of the Middle East, and we just happen to have black pepper in Northern Europe. It was, it was a commodity. It was very expensive. The American shipping figured this out in the 1860s and 70s. But there's no reason to use pepper. I mean, there's also lots of different kinds of pepper, right? There's Aleppo pepper and Urfa pepper and everything else. Smoked paprika is wonderful. I did a recipe with Jose Andres a few months ago. I visited him in Washington. When he was a kid, they didn't have a lot of money, and so at the end of the month, they'd have to do this sort of whatever they had recipe. And it was garlic, lots of garlic, stale bread, egg yolks, and like 2 or 3 tablespoons of smoked paprika, the really good stuff from Spain, and water. And you make the soup in about 20 minutes. It's fabulous. So that's great. Whole coriander, cumin. I think turmeric is great as well. Saffron, I just spoke to someone in Afghanistan. She did a tour of duty over there, then went back to start a company to export saffron to this country. It was the first time a lot of the women had actual income for themselves. And I said, well, I've been to markets around the world with these, the big pile of saffron. And I said, I know how expensive it is. That can't be real. She said, no, it's not. It's dried corn silk, dyed corn silk. So she said 90% of the Spanish saffron, which is supposed to be the best, doesn't come from Spain. It comes from other places. So the good stuff, and she sells it. I think it's Rumi, R-U-M-I is the name of the company, after a 13th century philosopher. She has really good stuff. So there's a few. I think the Aleppo and Urfa peppers are really interesting too. But cumin, if you get sitar, that's all you have to do. You can put it on eggs, you can put it on chicken, you can put it on everything. But cumin is really the number one. Cumin's in every spice mix. So I get whole and ground, if you could. Do you have another question? You did.
Would you ever consider, or would your organization ever consider offering tours with tour groups, taking people places?
Well, yes, not for a little while, but we've talked to Fuchsia Dunlop about that, for example, Jose Andres, some other people. Yes, when we do the TV show, we have to travel, obviously, and the trick is to find just home cooks to go talk to, because we don't want to go to restaurants necessarily. So once we figure that out ourselves, for example, Jason, my editor, was in Cape Town 3 months ago, and he's very good at research. He ended up in the Gugulethu Township, and he went to this barbecue place, which we wrote about a couple issues ago, where, and the Gugulethu Township's kind of a dangerous place to be. You go in, it's an all-day experience. You walk in, there's a huge crowd. It takes like a couple hours to get inside. You choose your meat, and the guys are cutting it up out of sides of beef and pork and everything else. You get a bowl of meat, like 15 pounds of meat. You go down the hallway, this dark hallway with fat on the floor, and go down to where they have the big wood-fired grills. And then you stand there with your bowl of meat for like 2 hours trying to get first in line. You get your meat grilled, and then they pour the sauce on it, the peri-peri sauce or whatever, and you bring it upstairs and go outside to a patio where there's live music and eat with your hands and dance. And it was about a 7-hour experience. So those are the kind of places we like to go to. You don't see too many tourists there, and it's not a typical restaurant. So yeah, but it'll probably take us another year and a half to sort that out. So.
Could you describe how you selected the recipes you put together for the book? Is it for the average cook?
The recipes are for the average cook. 85% of them don't have hard-to-find ingredients. We always look for a recipe that makes sense on a Tuesday night. You know, it's something you can make relatively easily. But there's another factor there, which is when we travel, when Jason travels, I travel too, but there's a website where you can, for $400, go anywhere in the world round trip. You just have to go when the ticket's available. So he booked 6 months ahead of time. He booked his travel. So when we have people travel, sometimes we pick a place because that was the $400 place we could go to. So it's very scientific. And so when we get there, then we figure out what to do. He was just in Tunisia, for example, for that reason, and came back with an amazing couscous dish and some other things. But our goal always is, when we make this on a Tuesday night, most of the recipes have to be under an hour. Or very simple to do, and it doesn't make sense for the American home kitchen, And if you look at a lot of places around the world as you travel, maybe 10 or 15% of those recipes actually translate well to the United States. So you have to go figure out. I was just on the phone with Jose Andres today about going to Spain with him in December, and the question is where to go to find recipes that we can bring back here that make sense. Because a lot of what they do there just isn't going to make any sense here. It's nice that the pigs run around and eat all these wonderful nuts, but that's not what we get here. So it's a different recipe. So
then, do you have to kind of Americanize, or I hate to say this, but dumb it down for our palates when you bring it back to the
I
US?
wouldn't quite put it that way. I don't know. Not so much for the palates. That's not the problem. The problem is. If you're in Chiang Mai, you have a way of cooking and you have certain implements and you're good at doing certain things. Some of that doesn't translate well. Some of it does. Stir-fried rice obviously does. But if you're going to steam a chicken, what a classic dish there is, they put really a chili paste with galangal and some other things over chicken, the top of a steamer, and underneath is water. And as that cooks, they make a soup. And so they serve a soup like they do in many places in the world, and then the chicken. Well, that's not probably a dish that makes a lot of sense here. Or if you do couscous, like they do in Tunisia, you have to figure out how to make that work here as well. But some other things, you don't have to do that at all. We did hummus exactly the way they do it in the Middle East, which is very simple to do. They put it in a huge food processor and whip it, and they serve it warm. And you eat it with pieces of onion often, or pita, if you like. And that was an authentic recipe. So sometimes we don't have to do anything, sometimes we do. Although when Jason was in Tel Aviv, he was standing on the street ordering it, and he ordered hummus with pita. Well, it always comes with pita. So they gave him a bag full of warm pita with warm hummus with pita in it. So everyone was looking at him like, what are you doing? Everyone else had a bowl. He just had a bag. So you have to kind of be careful how you order. So sometimes we do. But it's not dumbing it down. It's just making it approachable for people here. That's all. Yeah.
Do you have any favorites or recipes that you recommend trying first out of the book?
Yes. There is a few things. The simplest recipe in the book is the scrambled eggs, which I thought I invented. I've thought I've invented a lot of recipes over the years, only to find actually I'm a complete idiot because it was invented 500 years ago. I just used olive oil instead of butter once and got the oil really hot and put the eggs in, and they just puffed up when they were wonderful. And then I found a Bass cookbook 3 months later that said 2 eggs, 1 tablespoon of oil, heat the oil till it smokes, put the eggs in. So it turns out that olive oil gets much hotter than butter because butter has water in it, and it's just a totally different experience. So that's the world's simplest recipe. Harissa, some of the spreads and other things which you can throw in with mayonnaise, you can do lots of things with, are great. There's a wonderful stew in, though. It's a lamb or beef stew, which exemplifies the book because it has lots of different spices in it. Use water. You don't use stock. You don't saute the meat ahead of time. Use just a small amount of meat. It's just a terrific recipe, and it's simple to do. It takes about an hour. So those are a few, yeah.
So you've mentioned Chiang Mai a couple times, and I might actually be going there in January. So I'm wondering what are some of the signature dishes I should be eating while there, since I have you right here. And then what is this $400 travel website?
That's actually the most interesting thing I've said in the last half hour. I have no idea. I'll have to go find out. I will text him and find out. Well, in Chiang Mai, they have the grilled chicken, which they marinate overnight. And they have these huge 30-foot long braziers with coals. And what's interesting is they put ash on top of the coals so you don't get flare-ups. And then they have 2 bamboo skewers, like a V. And the chicken starts out down on the grill, and then they lift it up like this to finish it, and then they lift it all the way up to keep it warm. So they can adjust the height of the chicken to the coals just by how they put the skewers down in the grates. And there's a wonderful restaurant there that does that with papaya salad and some other things. And they have a sauce, a barbecue sauce, that is to die for. That's just really interesting. It's spicy, it's warm, it's sweet, it's just really good. There's a restaurant that's translated as the spicy basil restaurant for people who like hot food. And they have some amazing things. He did a quick stir-fried greens in 1 minute and a huge wok that was just to die for, just really delicious. I think Anthony Bourdain went there as well. There's Jacques Sumpit, I think is the name. It's terrible translation. They do rice porridge, rice soup, and they make it in about 2 minutes. They have rice, leftover rice. They have a warm, huge vat of stock. They put the stock in a $2 aluminum saucepan with the rice heated up. And then, like they do in a lot of places, it's all about the topping. So they have pork balls in it, but they have fried garlic and fried shallots and that really spicy white pepper they have there, which is terrific. So you can get different toppings for it, and they serve it on each table. They just have white vinegar with green chilies as a condiment. That's the standard condiment. So those are the few of the things that I think are really, really good. Papaya salad, of course, is something else that's terrific there. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Would you like to move on to signing?
Sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris, for speaking.